Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. I am coming to you from the disaster that is our move in Virginia. And we have Heidi here who is going to give us a whole lot of information on defining the scope of a project, and I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Hello, everybody. We've got some more people coming in, but I'm going to be pulling double duty. Um, so my name is Heidi Banky. I am the statewide project manager for Georgia Legal Services Program. We are a large LSC funded legal aid. We cover 154 of Georgia's 159 counties. And as a project manager, I get to work with a lot of different departments and with different teams in order to make projects happen. Um, we have received feedback. Yes, scope, very relevant right now. We've actually received feedback from several different people, both within this group and at conferences, about the importance of scope being talked about as a just general point. And I thought this would be a really good presentation to bring some more people together, have a conversation, and maybe we can find ways to elaborate on it more if there's anything else. Please do feel free to ask questions as I go or to put things in the chat. I will monitor to the best of my ability. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into it. So defining the scope. And you will see I got very crafty with some of the artwork here. I don't know why I did that. I just had to. Um, but let's so what we're going to cover today, what is scope and why is it important? Influencing factors on the scope, how to manage the scope, scope creep and other changes, submit those people, and other changes to the scope. So come on, there we go. Forgive me, my screens are not cooperating. There we go. So what is scope and why is it important? Scope covers the full extent of your project. It is everything. It is the goal. It is the work and people involved. It's the timeline. It's the budget. It is all of it wrapped in a bow. A strong scope, being able to talk about it, define it, and whatnot, is what it includes what is in the project and what is without the project. And it can also guide a lot of the conversations that happen throughout. And we'll reference that a billion times throughout this presentation. Ideally, the scope is well defined at the beginning of the project, but we all work at nonprofit legal aids. So I'm going to assume you've all interacted with at least one project where people really weren't sure what was going on. So ideally it's at the beginning. If you are at the beginning of a project, I do recommend trying to make sure you have these conversations early, even though it makes it feel like it's taking longer, because it will have an effect on the project as it goes forward and make the rest of the project go smoother. So why define it? Again, makes the rest of the project go smoother, but it provides a point of reference for the entire team and all of the stakeholders that are involved. It identifies your needs and responsibilities of people, and it identifies deadlines. So if one thing doesn't happen here, then one thing doesn't happen here, and one thing doesn't happen here, that butterfly effect ends up happening throughout the project. Being able to talk about the scope early helps you head off some of that. Clarifies roles and responsibilities. Every person who's involved in the project understands what they are contributing and why they're being expected to do it. Also, if somebody for some reason is no longer available, they can return to the scope, or somebody new can be returned to the scope and understand what they're taking over. Improves communication. You can have better conversations about the project because everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and what's going on. And then it helps avoid gold plating, which if you know what it is, great, brownie points. And if you don't, we're going to talk about it toward the end of the presentation. So influencing factors. What can influence the scope? A lot of people come to these kinds of discussions with grant projects. So it's very easy to talk about projects in terms of grants because grants force you to identify certain things in a way that a casual project within the program you're working with may not. So for example, grants will say, what are you going to do? What metrics are you going to use to fix this? It just asks a lot of questions. But they can also provide bumpers where you can't go outside of this line and you can't go outside of this line and you have to do this. And sometimes those can be good and bad. Funding increases and decreases. So we all, I think, are in a place where funding is a question and we never know what's going to come in the next year. Increases are always great. And if you, for some reason, have more money in your project, having a scope and understanding what things you need can help you identify how you would use additional funds if you were so given them. Funding decreases, if you know what's going to happen in the project and how long it's going to happen, you can see the effect of taking money out of your project, and you can also see if there is anything that can be reduced or extended so it can have a less of an impact on your budget for a given year. I am a huge fan of bringing the financial stuff in here. I know there's lots of people in the lawyer community who hate math and finances, but you really can get a lot out of just talking about funding and how it impacts how your scope is going. And then resource availability. In the project management world, resources means physical, so the stuff and people. I think that's a little kind of dehumanizing, but regardless, it is about people and materials that you need to make a project happen. If things are not available as you thought they would be, impacts your ability to do work. If you need more people to do work at the beginning and you can't get those people, you may have to reduce the scope. If you have more people and they're not doing anything, that can also be a detriment because your project is kind of moving slower than it can keep up with, or you need to be looking at how it is operating. That being said, those are the whats. Let's go to the who's. Come on. Who? Let's be owls for a second. So project team, substantive and other experts, stakeholders, those three can get blended together a little bit sometimes. So the team are the people who are actively working on the project. We're going to use this example throughout. I have a project where I am working with a team on improving our ability to integrate technology with clinics. I think that's the quickest way I can say it. The team are the people who are building the technology, testing the technology, trying to integrate the technology, all of that. The substantive and other experts are the people who we turn to for knowledge beyond what the team has to make sure that what we're doing is working correctly. The substantive experts are not part of the team. They are more people with certain knowledge that we need to incorporate. Stakeholders is a very broad group. It's anybody who can influence or be influenced by the project. They do not actively work on the project, but you do want their input to make sure what you're doing has a lasting impact. So if we talk about the project team, that's the group of people you may be with, but it's also the people who are doing the day in and day out work. Talking about the stakeholders, a lot larger of a group. You may divide them into different categories because not every stakeholder needs the same materials, but when they come in and they have opinions, it's coming at a prospect. It's coming from a perspective of if their project or their existing work is going to be impacted by it, or if they can exert influence on your project, that's where they're going to be coming from. That's where the cat herding happens. And then leadership and supervisors, those are the people who check the boxes and make sure that things are officially crossing from point A to B. And then you, as the project manager, you actually exert a lot of force over your scope, more than you probably know, especially if you have a well-defined one and you have it documented. You will be so much more able to say, this is what the project is supposed to do. This is not what the project is supposed to do. So I definitely, again, another theme you're going to hear is document, 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 because documenting is important. here's a couple of ways that you can influence the scope of your own project. So put the idea in writing. Never, ever, ever, again, document. Never leave a project without a scope in writing. I second documenting. Yes, thank you, Shelley. Grants, again, super useful way to think about projects because you are forced in a grant application or report to provide some kind of updates. And you can see what the grantors are asking for is very similar to the questions you should be asking yourself in a project. Formal memos, if you cannot use it, if it's not part of a grant, writing a formal memo where you just say, here's the goal, here's who's involved, here's what the timeline looks like. That announcement, gold, and not gold plating. Reiterate the project goal wherever possible. Bringing people back to square one and just stating, here's the goal of the project and here's how far we've come. You don't want to do it all the time, but you do want to put the opportunity out there because it also ends up being a kind of morale booster. Like those moments I think everybody has where you look back X amount of years and you see where you were versus where you are now, and hopefully it's a good place. But that is kind of a way to do that, but it's also a way to keep people on track and keep people thinking in the lines of the project instead of at all the other shiny things passing by. Find important information. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second, but the more access you have to information, the more you are able to come at the project with a sense of authority and knowledge about how the project is going, how similar projects have run, all of that. And then, of course, the more you speak with your team and stakeholders and all the people involved in the project in any way, shape, or form, the more you know about their concerns and the more you can both communicate what's going on and why decisions are being made and why certain things are progressing or not progressing the way they should be. And you get opinions from people and you're more approachable and they are able to tell you what's going on and what they think should happen and what their understanding of the project is. And with time, especially when you get into these 3 or 4 year projects, the ideas that you thought you started with end up transforming, and you want to make sure that you're picking people up and taking them with you. And so, how do you manage it all? Team materials and scope management. You always want to start with the long range view of your project. You don't start a project and then figure out how to integrate it later. You have ideally a long-term view of what you need within the organization in the realm of that project, and you're able to plug the project into it. If that's not the case, you still want to have conversations about how am I going to preserve the project long term. And sometimes that is not easy. I think I see a hand raised. Oh, a clap. Okay, thank you for the clap. But you always, always, always want to know what is going on long term, because if you don't, what's going to happen is your project, no matter how successful, is more likely to just, oh, look at that great thing we did, and then disappear. You want to protect your team and the project scope. The clear defining of the scope, all that stuff we just said about documenting, all that stuff about who everybody is and how they're involved. If you have that clearly defined, you are able to hold on to the scope and the team holds on with you. You're not just dragging people around or herding cats because they're all in it with you and your team is together. The biggest thing that I think I've seen people forget is to protect the team is also to make sure that they all have the training and resources that they need. The more communication you have with your team, the more you've better identified what is going to happen with the project and what needs we have and what the timeline looks like, the more likely they are to come back to you and say, I'm not sure I know how to do this. How do I do, like, what part of this is here? Who do I talk to for this? It gives you the red flag of, oh, this isn't available. I need to make sure that they can go to this. Hey, this training would be really helpful to brush up on this thing. Not every training needs to be a formal, let's go attend a CLE or a conference or whatnot. But when you can identify those gaps and close those gaps, it just makes everything run that much smoother. Sometimes it is a big effort. We had an issue where we had newer staff coming into the project and then suddenly realized that the newer staff did not have information that they needed to effectively integrate with the basic levels of the team because we just didn't have that much turnover in the past. So we very hastily, it wasn't hastily, it was rushed because it was well done. It just took a lot of effort in a very short amount of time to develop basic level training. And then that helped close that gap so that they could better integrate into the overall project. And yeah, so the more you have there, the more you're able to interact with the team, the more your team can support you, and the more the team supports you, the easier it gets. And it makes a happy team, and everybody likes working with a happy team. Stakeholder and scope management. We've said this a couple of times. I've said this a couple of times. Stakeholders are the broadest group. They are the cat herding responsibility most often. And the level of involvement that they have can greatly take things off track or keep them on track or whatnot. Effective stakeholder engagement means that you know who is involved, who's giving you and who you need to give feedback to, that they are engaged with the project, that they are being listened to, and that when feedback is given or when ideas are presented, you as the project manager are able to strategically communicate like, yes, this fits. We can try this. No, this doesn't fit. We need to do something different with this. Here's the project. Here's where the barriers are. It's not necessarily conflict resolution as a skill, but it is, you have to think about the communication you receive from them in any form with an eye about what does it mean to the scope? Does this impact the scope? And I think in my experience, people have always appreciated if I've gone back to the documents and said, I don't think this really fits, but I know it can be a point of tension. If you are someone who is not comfortable in that kind of environment, I really do recommend, I had somebody who had a really good phrase for it, but it was, I need to percolate on that, or I need to take some time and process the information and I'll get back to you. And it was always their way of kind of ducking out and being able to come back later. But don't be afraid to say, I need a minute to consider, and then return to your scope documents and see if it works or not. And then you can send somebody you can call them, you can see them in person, you can chat with them, you can, whatever form of communication you're more comfortable with. You can come back and say, hey, I think this is a good idea. Here's what we're going to do. Or I don't really think this fits, but you might want to check this thing out or point them in a different direction. Communication, we're already talking about it. It's a two-way street. Those of you who've attended the LSNTAP series that we've been doing have seen it from other presenters. Communication is not just me talking to you. It is also about you understanding what I'm saying, and obviously vice versa. But I do want to point out there are technically 4 categories of communication. And then beneath those, there's a million different ways. But the 4 categories are informal and formal oral communication and informal and formal written communication. So informal oral communication, water cooler moments. I'm just going to pop into your office real quick. Let's have coffee. Let's talk about what's going on. Formal oral communication, think presentation, like what I'm doing right now. I have a PowerPoint. We're going through a speech. We're going through all of the different things. Written communication, informal. It's the chat that you send to your colleagues while you're listening to this presentation. I know we're all doing it. And formal written communication, think memo, think brief if you want to do that. But So there's different ways there. But just like I said, it could be a chat, it could be an email. There's different technologies that can give you informal written. Um, there's different methods to do oral communication. I mean, it's all over the place. Um, but do know that you want to tailor which type of communication you do to the person you're talking to. If a person needs to be talked in a formal way, like you need to have everything planned out and you know what questions they're going to ask, tailor that to them so that they better understand you. If you're preparing for a meeting, I am preparing right now for an advisory committee meeting on a grant. I send out the agenda a week ahead of time so everybody knows what we're going to talk about. And it gives them an opportunity to prepare questions or get ready and know if they need to be present or if they can wait for the notes. But that gives them time. Other groups, we can send them the agenda the day of because we know they're going to be there and they don't need a whole lot of time and there's nothing for them to consider aside from, hey, look at this. Um, but yeah, so different levels, tailor the communication to your audience. And you want to balance and make sure that everyone on the team and all of your stakeholders know what the status of the project is as it pertains to them. I do encourage more than just an annual update to your stakeholders, but again, that does depend on what your project is and how everything works. Your team should know obviously more often, but right now our advisory committee on that one project meets quarterly. And then we update on all of the things that we've done since the last meeting, and we talk about the challenges we're currently having, and we solicit ideas. And so that's how we keep those people engaged. And other groups meet at different intervals depending on what is necessary. You do not want to communicate information that they do not need to have. Not everybody needs to know that, hey, we're stalled on this one thing because we've done all this research and here's all the list of extensive research we've done. That's something that only needs to be kept within the team. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Again, make sure people know what the project is about, especially if you haven't met with them in a long time. And it doesn't have to be flashy neon sign here. It could be as simple as putting the goal of the project in the footer. But there are different ways to do it, and you want to make sure that everybody is aware of the current status, where you are, and what you're doing. And that they have a way to reference it because again, longer term projects, they can take a while for people. Excuse me. Longer term projects, people have a tendency to forget what's going on with time. Schedules. I don't know how everyone feels about schedules. I know some people love them and some people loathe them. Loathe them. But here's a little bit of how you can use a schedule to manage your scope. You can group tasks, cluster them so that you're monitoring the project to see if it's ahead of time or behind time. So rather than just waiting for every 6 months when a grant requires you to submit a report, you can take all the little tasks that you know have to be completed, put them in clusters, which is a less formal way of talking about sprints, and put them into this is going to happen in this 2 weeks, this is going to happen in this month, this is going to happen here. As you're monitoring those, you can say, oh, we're ahead of time. Oh, we're a little more relaxed. And then you can also say, oh, we need to ramp things up. That way you're not surprised at the end. Schedules are not just about assigning tasks to be completed in the time, it's also assigning who needs to be involved at the time that you're looking at. If you have both the people and the task, then you know who's going to be busy doing what. And you can look at your calendar and say, this is not realistic for this one person. This is not equitable distribution. This other person's not doing anything over here. And it also gives you, if you can have these conversations with your team, time to compare the project timeline against things that they may be having in their own lives, against things that are major holidays that you may be forgetting, other initiatives that are coming up. For example, I think everybody knows that everyone who's funded by LSC knows that the end of December leads into a period of courting in January. And so there can be a lot going on, especially at the higher level people who prepare those reports, which means that that's not a good time to ask certain people for certain information. So if I want a lot of work or I need a lot of help from people who are in that kind of boat, I know I can't talk to them about it in this time. It also can identify when key decisions need to be made. So our current timeline for that clinics project that I told you about, we also include this person needs to approve this by this date. And we sent that to that person, and they were able to look at their own schedule and say, hey, this is what's going to be on here. This should be fine as long as I get it with enough time as you've put it on this. So if everything else lines up, they can make that work. But that means that they can calendar dates when they need to make decisions. And we've been thoughtful enough to give them to that 6 months ahead of time. Cost. Couldn't get out without another finance talk. But you do want to learn your project's budget. That includes both grant and match funds, if applicable. For those of you not as familiar with grant and match funds, sometimes grants will give you money, but they also want your organization to put money into it to demonstrate their buy-in on the idea. Those are match funds. So because the grant may require you to spend money that is not associated with the grant, those are all part of your budget. But you need to know what's assigned, where it's assigned, and you need to understand how your spending and expenses are tracking against what's assigned. If you are not formally set up and you have not been given a budget, can ask for ballparks, especially if it's buying new technology or you're looking into how to integrate some new system or software into an existing one. But usually, I think the biggest expense most of us have is probably staffing. Another way you can talk about budget without talking about budget is to talk about time, and how much you can ask for of a person. And you can monitor that in different ways. If you are finding at some point that you're under budget or over budget, there's some ideas on how you can shift things around, but every project is going to have its own unique ways of dealing with it. You do want to keep an eye out for one-time expenses skewing something. And if you can't access budget information on your project because of your internal office policies or whatnot, there is a way to have conversations with your accounting team. If you can explain to them why you need the information, maybe they won't give you the raw data, but maybe they can tell you you're under budget here. Here's the staff that are involved. Here's a problem that we see on this level. Shelley wrote, budget tracking can be a problem for project managers. That if the organization doesn't allow access to the information, absolutely, it really can be. But there's different ways to talk about it. And I hope that at the very least, it means that you can go to whoever's in charge of your finance, explain why you need the information and what you plan to do with it. And again, they may not give you the raw data, but maybe they can tell you more about the information, like what information you're asking about. If you come in the middle of a project, which I think is something that we've seen a lot of. I mentioned this right at the beginning. Grab everything you can from before you started the project. The goals and expectations that were set, any applications that were made, any changes that were made, original versions of documents, as well as the current versions of documents, information about the individuals involved with the project and what role they were playing. This may not be formally written down, so you may have to go have meetings with people, talk to them, figure out what sense they're getting. And I always recommend, if you are just taking over a new project, hold kickoff meetings with different groups. That may be the stakeholder group, that may be your project team, that may be your supervisors or the people who sign off on things. But at least go in, say what you believe is the status of the project, what your plans are, and what you're expecting in the next steps. And allow them to correct you if you haven't understood something properly. But at least you're getting everybody back on the same page. Um, and you're opening the door and you're presenting yourself as the person who is the new go-to for the project. Challenges. Before we go into challenges, did anybody have questions? We've all been quiet. Okay, hearing nothing. I'm gonna go ahead. Scope creep. There's lots of really cool things out there. And I think people get wrapped up sometimes in a new idea and they end up taking the project further than it needed to be, and it can really distract and sometimes hurt the existing things. This is why I recommend if people have a change idea, they put it in writing, and the change is actually thoroughly considered to make sure it aligns with the project scope. If it's outside the scope, you can absolutely say, I don't think this suits this project. I don't think this fits. But if it's within the scope, see if it works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's still, even if it's within the scope, is not something that's feasible for the team. Just know that whenever you do or don't accept a change, you should communicate that. Don't just leave it in the dark. Gold plating. You do not need to make the $100 version when the $10 version will do. The trap I've heard the most often is we'll use this feature eventually, or we'll do this eventually. And then eventually does not mean definitely. What ends up happening a lot of times with that is something else falls to the wayside, and that thing that they wanted to do eventually becomes, oh, well, that's not really a good fit for us. So if you paid for the $100 version for a thing that was going to happen later, then the thing doesn't happen. You've just paid extra for nothing. It will increase the cost to your budget or the expenses that you spend, which means that something else is going to go down. That may not be a problem in some cases, but it will usually be a problem in others. If in doubt, always go back to your project documents and see what is needed versus what is extra. Especially when talking with vendors, they do want to show you all the bells and whistles and they want to show you all the fancy features. But if you know very clearly what purpose each feature is serving, and what you need, it can save you a lot of money and it can make you have a more productive conversation, with the vendors, the people you're talking to. Just to be able to say, this is the box I need. I don't need anything else. If what is the thing that meets this box? And then if somebody really, really, really wants to add the gold plating, don't be afraid to say that, well, I can do this, but another project might be able to help with that. So we can work together on it. We can split the cost. We can do X, Y, and Z with it, but it really doesn't fit to do this extra thing over here. And I know that, again, can feel difficult to say, but especially when it involves extra money, usually your director of finance or the equivalent of that in your organization will support you in saying, don't spend money recklessly. So yeah, that's another thing. And documenting, can't get away without another documenting conversation. I won't go into the specifics because we've already talked about them all. But make sure that you're documenting everything. The slides will be available, as will the recording of this presentation if you want to take more than a second to get the screenshot. And with that, it is Q&A time.
I'd like to leave the recording on for a few minutes because I'm sure there are some questions that aren't specific to your organization or very specific. But then we will have some time at the end where we will turn off the recording so you can ask if if there's a question you don't want to ask and have recorded. So I see Amanda has a question.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about projects that if you don't have full leadership buy-in behind you and ways to kind of address that and I guess get them on the same page?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different tactics to do that. First is you want to make sure that you need to know the stance of the leadership. And I don't know how many people you're talking about in a leadership position that would be impacted by that. But it's often easiest to have one-on-one conversations with people to get a sense of what they're individually thinking. Um, there are systems to identify stakeholder support where you can formally document if the person is against kind of supportive, very supportive championing the project. And if you work with that, you know, okay, these people need to be brought forward. Here's what their concerns are. What I would recommend if it's about leadership and it's a project that has already been committed to, part of the blunt conversation needs to be, we've committed to this, here's the thing. And part of it needs to be, what are your hesitations? What would you like to see? What can I do to make this project more effective for you? And hopefully you don't get a response of there's absolutely nothing you can do. But you do want to be able to find out what their concerns are, what they're excited about, and then eventually craft the project scope to make sure that it accounts for all of that. Does that answer your question?
It does. All great points. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a project management tool that I recommend? I am a member of the Project Management Institute, and well, okay, wait. Question. When you say project management tool, are we talking technologies or are we talking templates or are we talking everything?
A little bit of everything.
Okay. So we have had previous presentations on LSNTAP with different technologies where we had one presenter who was actually a vendor with a project management software. Shelley, I've already forgotten who that was, but that person talked about a little more in depth what their software did. But we had another forum where 4 different legal aids talked about different ones that they use. I highly recommend in terms of technology that you talk or that you review those. When it comes to tools and templates, it really depends on what's going on. There are some templates available. I'm going to go ahead and get out of the share. There are templates available for anything you can think of. I do recommend the Project Management Institute for more formal project management templates, but I will say that the LSNTAP folder, there's a project management component on the website where we have already compiled several different types of templates for different things. Let me find that and put it in the chat.
Thank you.
No problem. And Shelley, I ask this basically, oh, YouTube playlist. Yeah, I was gonna say, Shelley, I ask this every time, but can you put the playlist in there? And then here is.
And we are working on the new website. We're going to have a hub for project management. And so you'll be able to go there to get the videos, to get any handouts and all of that. That's coming very soon.
Well, that's what you get for presenting, Matt, is you get your year-old thumbnail. And of course, Miguel, if you ever have questions, you can always reach out. I'm more than happy to see if I have any templates that I can dig up. Because there are lots of tools that people have, and some of the more formal ones, every project is different. So every project you want to tailor it a little bit more. But I'm going to put my email address just in case.
Thank you so much.
No problem.